Okay, so you already mentioned that this game is going to be a little bit weird because you're up against a Blitzcrank. And I'm glad you mentioned that because one of the first things that I like to think about in every single game is the lane matchup. So there's 3 questions that I like to ask myself at the start of every game. If you've watched my other coaching sessions that I've uploaded to my channel, you've probably heard these questions before. Those questions are, how do I want to play the lane phase? What is my role on the team? And what is my team's win condition? And of course, the first of those questions that comes into play is going to be the lane phase. So let's break this lane down little by little. We have a Jinx on your side who is a scaling ADC, and that should right away point to us saying that this is not going to be a very aggro lane because she wants to scale. On top of that, Janna isn't really a lane dominant champion. She can poke a little bit with her W. She can shield her ADC, which will allow you to sustain a little bit longer in fights, and you have your tools for CC. But overall, she just has a lot of utility, not so much a lane bully kind of presence. Even though with Spell Thieves, as I see you built in this game, you can chunk a little bit with your W. With that being said, though, you and Jinx together are really just not a threat whatsoever in this lane. And to make matters worse, you guys are up against a Blitzcrank, who's an absolute lane bully. Ziggs is a little bit of a weird pick. We haven't seen him so much recently, so it's kind of hard to know exactly where he's going to fit in. But for the most part, when he's combined with Blitzcrank, you can expect a really dominant lane. So, spoiler for people that are watching this video, but you guys do go on to lose this game, correct? Okay, so I'm assuming that if you guys don't play this lane correctly, that could be a very big reason as to why the enemy team is able to snowball. But we'll have to see for sure if that is the reason that the enemy team is able to pull ahead. And I'm going to back up real quick just so we can see how you manage this level 2. So the thing is we've already mentioned and we've made it very clear that this is a lane that you guys lose because it's a Jinx Janna into Ziggs Blitzcrank. But the thing is they don't actually win this lane until level 2, I would say, because Blitz, even though he has his hook most likely level 1, he doesn't really have much kill threat without his E because they're not going to be able to CC you long enough. So with that being said, you don't have to be scared in this lane until level 2, and that means that you can actually get yourself ahead by getting the level 2 first. So what you do here is you go and you poke Ziggs, which is nice and all, but you're not really controlling this wave as much as I would like you to. As you see, you're doing a lot of poking with them, which is nice. It's going to get them very briefly chunked, but you aren't controlling the wave the way that you should be. So we'll see here, you're playing very, very far back. Again, I don't think that this is a lane that you have to play far back in until level 2. And we'll see here to see if you're able to control this wave. And doesn't look like you're doing much. Okay, so right off the back, we're only 2 minutes into this game, but I would say that the level 2 power spike is something that you need to put a lot more of an emphasis on. I would expect the reason for you not trying to control this wave is because you're afraid of the Blitzcrank, but it's important to note that he won't be able to do much to you until he has his E at level 2. So you need to be controlling this wave to make sure that you're getting level 2 before him. A, because you can, and B, because if he gets level 2 first, then you guys are in a really, really rough position. So you should be autoing this wave with your ADC in order to allow you guys to have the level 2 power spike. A couple more things worth noting is you prioritize chunking them over the wave, and I think that that was wrong in the first place. You should always put a higher priority on the level 2 power spike instead of chunking the enemy team, because if you hit that level 2 power spike, then you can chunk them afterwards, and it'll be a lot easier. The other thing is anytime you're up against a Ziggs, which I know this is a weird pick, as I've already mentioned, we don't see this often, but when you're up against him, it's really important to try to stay away from the minions, because he has that splash damage. So the reason that you're so low right now is a combination of because you were running up and poking the enemy team and receiving some damage, as well as the fact that you took some splash damage from Ziggs. So those are a bunch of little things that all kind of are a factor in this little play here. But I would say the biggest thing to pull away from this was the fact that you didn't control that level 2 nearly as well as you could have. Okay, so this is, again, a little bit of a weird situation, kind of similar to how there's a weird ADC pick, so playing with it is a little bit different. You guys also have a Twitch jungle, which is, not very typical, so it's kind of hard to play around it. I would say if this was any champion other than Twitch, your reaction would have been fairly bad. But because Twitch was invisible, I can kind of understand why you hung back so much, because you didn't want to give away the gank. So I understand this, and I'm just pointing this out so that you, in the future, you are more aware of it. And again, this might just be some information that you're already aware of. But in the future, make sure that you are up ahead or moving forward at a good pace so that you're confronting the enemy at the same time your jungler is. And if you are able to do that, then you will have to then flash after them. And instead, you'll already be in the correct position. But you guys did have a Twitch invisible. So it's a little bit different in this situation. Okay, so you are Diamond 5, correct? Or somewhere around there? Okay, so I'm really glad to see this, because I would say that for most low elo players, this is a huge problem. Because in lower ranks, people don't really understand the importance of getting really good back times after you get a lead, making sure that you're cashing in that gold, making sure that you're pushing in the wave. So I am glad to see that you're doing all these things, but I still do have one recommendation. So again, I'll compliment you on all the things that you're doing right, but then I'll try to add on to anything that I can. The first thing that you're doing right is, as soon as you guys pick up that kill, you guys are making it a priority to push in this wave and then recall, which is great, and I like the fact that you're also helping your ADC push in this wave. The only thing that I would change is you can only help your ADC push in the wave so much, and after a certain point, the minions will be so low that if you auto them, you'll be taking them away from your ADC, which is why you don't auto them anymore. And that's what you kind of do. You get them really nice and low, and then you stick around. And it's only for a few seconds. It's about 5-6 seconds maybe. But in League of Legends, time is everything. It's so very valuable. And as a support, I think time is even more valuable, because every little second that you can save is an extra second that you could be active on the map. So let's say, for example, you started your recall earlier in those 5 seconds or 5 to 6 seconds that you weren't really doing anything. What you could have been doing instead is then you are 5 to 6 seconds to base faster than your ADC, which allows you to then roam around the map and then meet back up with your ADC at the same time that they're getting to lane. I think that roaming as a whole is really important as support. And although Janna doesn't have the strongest of roams, there's a lot of things that you could be doing with that time. And when I say roaming, I don't really just mean that you're like going mid and trying to get a kill. Roaming could be something as, scoping out vision over here, getting wards in the enemy jungle, maybe trying to 2-man dragon with your jungler, roaming mid with your jungler, trying to get a three-man gang. So there's a lot of things that you can be doing while roaming around the map. And so every little second that you can save in the lane phase and that you can then put towards roaming will make a very big difference. And who knows, this is a long shot, but maybe if you had backed a little bit earlier, you get over here and you're able to kill Siobhan or something. That's just a very brief example. As we see, you're here. Potentially, if you got those few seconds further, you could have been here. So that just kind of goes to prove the point. And I'm glad that we are able to see Shyvana like this, because it makes what I'm saying make a lot more sense. So again, I think that timing is everything, and every time you can find a window to save a few seconds, whether that be just because your ADC can finish off the wave by herself, you want to make sure that you're taking that time. One last note about roaming that I always like to say is you don't want to take this route down the lane when you're coming back from base. I have a golden rule when it comes to roaming, and that is you should always roam every time you're coming back from base, whether you just died or whether you're recalled. Anytime your ADC is not in lane, or anytime your ADC has a safe and secure freeze in lane. And as I mentioned, anytime you're coming back from base is one of those times you want to roam. So when you roam, you want to take this path instead, down the jungle and into the river, rather than just running down the bot lane. The reason for that being is because if you run through the river, you're giving yourself a lot of options. I've already listed all the options, such as trying to 2-man dragon or getting vision or roaming mid, all those kind of things. Those are all options if you're in the area. Whereas if you just run straight bottom, your only option at that point is I'm going bottom, and you're limiting yourself as far as what you are capable of doing. And I think in this situation, if you put those two factors together, taking this path as well as saving that little bit of extra time, you would have been right here in this situation to confront the Shyvana. So it is really, really nice when I'm watching game and the things that I point out kind of go hand in hand with the current situation. So it's really nice to see how that could actually be a factor. And not too much going on in this lane. And this is another thing. I don't think this is really too much of a factor for you because it hasn't been a problem yet. But what I notice is a lot of players have this problem of losing games just because they get impatient. So what I mean by that is, as we've already made very clear, yeah, well, I mean, it doesn't really seem like the case in this game because we've made it very clear that you guys don't win this lane. This is not a lane that you should really be all that active in. And instead of playing aggressive, you are playing to your your lane condition, which is playing safe. So what I mean by people often lose games by not being patient is, even though the best thing to do in some situations is to do nothing, as it is in this case, because doing nothing in this lane is what's going to allow you guys to scale. That's just what you really need to do. And some people can't, put up with that. Some people just have to be active. So it is really, really refreshing to see that you are doing nothing. I know that sounds crazy, but sometimes doing nothing really is doing something. And I think that you guys scaling in this game is what you need to be doing. With that being said, though, you guys are doing what is right and what you should be doing, and you guys still do go on to lose this game. So I'm gonna be really interested to see what it is that goes wrong, and why exactly you guys lose the game. And that could very well be not playing to your team's win condition, or not playing, suiting to your role on the team, which are the other questions that I mentioned earlier, that we'll address a little bit later on. But yeah, we'll just have to wait it out and see really what goes wrong in this game. So I think now is a decent time to talk about power spikes. I think that power spikes are very, very undervalued in this game because not a lot of people really understand it. So when it comes to power spikes, I think it's important to note that there are many different types of power spikes in this game. There are the spike when you have a level over your opponent, or you have your ultimate over the opponent, or you have a certain item over the opponent. All these different things that could be considered power spikes. I don't think you guys are necessarily at a power spike yet. I think your guys' first power spike is going to be maybe when Jinx hits 1 or 2 items. But that's another thing that I'm really interested to see you guys playing around, is going to be power spikes. And even though, I just mentioned that Jinx's main power spike is going to be at 1 or 2 items, I think that now, during this part of the game, you could actually start to play a little bit more aggressive. Because even though Jinx wants to scale and she hasn't hit her, ideal power spike, a power spike could be something as simple as you have better items than the opponent, which is the case here. Ziggs is only sitting on a lost chapter, and Jinx is sitting on a pickaxe. So you guys could potentially start playing more aggressive in this lane. On top of that, Blitzcrank has been roaming around the map a lot, which is another thing that should lead to you guys being more aggressive. So the state of the game will change throughout the game, and that sounds like a very obvious statement, but a lot of people can't really get a grasp on that. So a good example of that is at the start of this game, you guys were in a lane that you did not want to be in. It was a lane that you guys should in all situations lose. But as you guys started to pull ahead, you guys picked up 2 assists. You and Jinx managed to pick up 2 assists. Blitzcrank has been roaming around the map. Now you guys have an item advantage. Now you guys are somewhat ahead in this lane. So the state of the game has changed, and you haven't really been adapting all too much to it. I've noticed that you have, been a little bit more aggressive, walking up and chunking the Ziggs here and there. But for the most part, you haven't been as aggressive as you could have been, given your guys' very large lead. So that is one thing. The other thing is when you are, pushing your lead, you don't want to be reckless with it. So I think that is the reason that this goes so poorly. The reason that you were so low is because you were taking really, really poor trades, and you were being reckless with it. So you guys do have a little bit of a lead, as we've already mentioned, all the little factors that go into you guys having the lead, whether that be the gold advantage or the item advantage. Those are all things that are a factor in your lead, which is pointing you towards the direction of, I need to play aggressive. I should be playing a little bit more aggressive. But when you're doing that, you also need to make sure that you're doing it calculated. So I praised you earlier on how you were being patient, but now you're kind of going back and like proving me wrong in a sense, and being overly aggressive. The reason you were so low at the start of this fight was because you were walking up to Ziggs and taking really bad trades, taking a few tower shots. Here you guys do a really reckless dive. You started tanking it and you were too low. You didn't even know where the mid laner is. You don't know where the jungler is. You don't know where the support is. So this was a really, really reckless dive. And even though you've been playing this lane so well throughout this game, this is gonna be a 3-0. It looks like. Yeah. So that is, you know, you guys played this lane very, very well for the most part. But this one reckless play is what's going to set the pace for the rest of the game, I'm assuming. We'll have to play it out to see, but this is probably one reason that you guys do go on to lose the game. Just because you lost sight of what you should have been doing. You weren't playing to what your role was, and you got your you let your lead get, you know, in your head a little bit. So make sure that you are keeping complete focus on what your role is and how you want to be playing this game out throughout the entirety of the game, because as we just saw, the second you let that your focus slip as far as what you should be doing, it could result in a big play for the enemy team. And, you know, I was playing a game earlier today and I had a very similar situation where we were winning the whole game, and then all of a sudden we made a greedy call. We got three of our players died, and we gave the enemy dragon, and that just instantly shifted the game in their favor. So I think that, you know, with this example in your game on top of the example that I just gave from my game earlier today, it becomes really clear that, you know, just because you get ahead and just because you're playing to your condition at first, that doesn't mean that you can just, you know, drift away from it and stop playing to your condition. All right, so this is what Stunt is building on Janna. This is the person that I was talking about earlier. So this is the ideal build that I would be going for. Maybe not the Medjai's. I think the Medjai's is a little bit on the greedier side. But at least the first 5 items are going to be your cord. So, you know, the support item, it shows this because this is what he eventually builds. But in your game, I would stick to what you have, which is just the first 850 gold item. So again, I think your build should be along the lines of the Spell Thief's item built into Eye of the Frost, which is just the 850 gold item. I don't know if you are aware of why that is, but I'll let you know just in case you don't know. The reason you do this is because building it up all the way isn't all that impactful, because the statistics that you are getting from it don't really match the gold price that you're spending, so it's not really worth buying it right away. After that, you should be going CDR boots. When it comes to boots on Janna, people like to go CDR boots or mobility boots. But I think when it comes to Janna, roaming isn't that great, which is why mobility boots aren't really as much as a priority compared to somebody like Karma, who has a similar role to Janna but can roam a little bit more efficiently. So on Karma, you'd go something like mobility boots, but on Janna, you go CDR boots. After Eye of the Frost and CDR boots, you're going to want to rush Ardent. So Ardent has kind of fallen out of the meta just a little bit after its nerfs last season, which is why it's not, you know, super highly prioritized anymore. But on champions like Janna, who are just so focused around heals and shields and who can apply Ardent so very often, it's still more beneficial to be building that first. So that'll be your next item. After that, you're going to go Redemption, followed by Locket. And your 5th item, or your last item rather, is the same case for any champion then. My golden rule when it comes to 6 items is you always want to build a defensive item that best suits the game that you are currently in. So for example, if the enemy team has a lot of AP damage, you'd build magic resist. That could be something like Crucible. If the enemy team has a lot of AD damage, you might build something like Knight's Vow or Zeke's. So you have a little bit more armor. So the 6th item will vary from game to game, but your core first 5 items should be Spell Thieves, build it into Eye of the Frost, and eventually into the final piece of that. Followed by CDR boots, Ardent Sensor, Redemption, and Locket. I think that you know, I don't really know what you go on to build in the rest of this game, but for the most part, I would say the biggest change so far is going to be changing Sorcery boots or Sorcerer's boots to CDR boots. Okay, so this is something that I hear a lot of people say. I'll pause it so we don't miss anything. But something I hear a lot of people say is whenever I give them advice for some things, whether that be, you know, build or playstyle or champion that they should be playing, a lot of people like to say, oh, well, I'm doing this because of this. And I think that, you know, that works sometimes. You know, some people, they say like, oh, I like playing a Mumu support. And I'm like, oh, well, you shouldn't be playing a Mumu support. And they say, oh, well, I'm playing a Mumu support for A, B, and C. I'm like, okay, well, I mean, you have your reasons for it. But when it comes to my advice, I have this mentality of like, you shouldn't fix what's not broke. So when there's certain things in League of Legends that are really, really good, that have proven to be effective, I just like to go with it. So I like your argument for why you should be building Sorcerer's Boots. You gave me the story about how you like to go mid and you can do surprising damage to enemies and stuff, which is nice. Like, I like the fact that you're thinking about those things. But again, just going back to my idea that I like to not try to fix not fix what's I don't like to fix what's not broke. So when CDR boots have been proven to be really, really effective and arguably the best option, which is what I have seen for myself as well as seen for professional players building it, I would just stick with CDR boots for the most part. Does that make sense though? I mean, I gave you a really extreme example, with people like, oh, I like playing a Mumu support, but it's kind of the same thing, there's no point in doing something that's like off meta or something like that, instead of just doing what's proven to work. So the next piece of advice that I'll tell you is just some general game knowledge. Even though I don't feel you can make much of a difference about it, but the thing is this is just really common for solo queue. Is you will often see numbers like this: 20 kills in a game, only 15 minutes in. And the reason for that being is because people get so caught up in just fighting all the time. And like I said, you probably won't be able to do much with this information, but I do think it's important for you to at least know. And the reason that you won't be able to change this is because, you're playing with 9 other people, and there's no way that you're going to be able to control the game entirely when you're playing with 9 other people. But ideally, in a perfect world, you only want to be fighting when it comes to fighting over objectives. And the fact that there are 2 towers taken in this game and 2, let's see, there's 2 towers taken so far, 1 Rift Herald and 2 dragons. So 5 objectives have been taken in this game, which doesn't really make sense when you're thinking about there's 20 kills in the game. So there's 20 kills in the game compared to 5 objectives. That kind of shows that all these fights are being fought over nothing. But like, just going back to my point, you ideally only want to be fighting when it comes to fighting over objectives. Okay, so we are 17 minutes into this game, so it's a pretty decent time to talk about the other 2 questions that I mentioned previously at the very start of the game, and those questions are: what is your role on the team, and what is your team's win condition? So when it comes to your role on the team as Janna, your role isn't very diverse. There's some champions like Leona and Thresh and Alistar whose role on the team can kind of vary from game to game. When it comes to Janna, though, your kit kind of makes you very one-sided. You're almost always going to be very peel focused. You have your ability to like run up and poke some people at times, and you can make some plays on Janna, but for the most part, you're just going to be very utility focused, very peel focused. So that's very obvious. That's not really something that you have to put much thought into when playing Janna. But on some other champions, I do think it's important to ask yourself, what is my role in the team, and what I need to be doing in this game. So a good example. Oh, go for it. Yeah, I mean, that kind of goes hand in hand with what I was saying earlier about how there's so many kills compared to objectives, because that's just how solo queue is. People just like to run around and get kills. But in a perfect world, if you really are looking to climb, you should be making sure that you are paying attention to all these little things like objectives and, playing to your role on the team rather than just running around and, coming over here, throwing tornadoes and trying to kill Ziggs and whatnot, as we saw, 5 minutes earlier. And then moving on to the other question, which is, what is your team's win condition? Your team is a little weird. You guys have a little bit of a strange team comp. No tank, double ADCs with an assassin. But for the most part, I would say that your guys' team win condition is playing to the mid to late game. Not necessarily scaling so long to the point that you're waiting for a 40-minute game, because you guys do have some mid-game presence, especially with Renekton and Fizz. So I think focusing on the mid to late game would be your priority this game. On top of that, it's going to come down to peeling your ADCs. The reason for that being is because Renekton and Fizz are very dive heavy. They're going to try to assassinate the other carries, which means that with your mid laner and your jungler or your top laner not really providing a front line, as well as your jungler not providing a front line, the enemy team has their carries or their front line then on your back line. So your guys' win condition basically kind of revolves around you, I would say. Just because you guys don't have a front line, so it's kind of all up to you to keep your carries alive. So we'll see as the game progresses if you're able to do that, and if that's a factor as far as why you guys go on to lose this game. So you just mentioned how a lot of the times you will find yourself running around like chasing kills because you get bored. And that's very understandable. This is a video game after all. So when people play, you should be playing this game to have fun. But then the thing that comes into play is, what do you value more? Do you value like climbing? Because sometimes people find climbing to be fun, or do you value, just strictly having fun? But like I said, some people can look at climbing and say like, oh, winning games and climbing, that's fun to me. But for some other people, that's not. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it just comes down to what you really value. Some people play this game and they never touch ranked, and that's fine. People want to just play normals and play with friends and stuff, and I get that. But if you are looking to climb, and if that's what you value is a high rank in League of Legends, as you mentioned at the very very start, that you are looking for something other than D5. Then you should probably be putting a higher priority on winning games, even if that means you're going to be a little bit bored. On top of that, maybe something could be as simple as a change in a play style or a champion pick, rather than a change in focusing or not. That is never something that you really want to change up. So I have a lot of golden rules, as you might have heard me say. Like I have this golden rule, I have that golden rule. Another one of my golden rules is I like to ask myself throughout the entirety of the game, what am I accomplishing right now? So again, that sounds like something like a very dumb question, I guess, at first. But it goes hand in hand with what we were talking about, as far as being bored in the game. Because, sometimes people get bored, sometimes people's minds kind of drift off into La La Land and whatnot, and they stop focusing on the game. So you want to constantly ask yourself, what am I accomplishing right now? Because if you ask yourself that question, a lot of times you might realize, I'm not really focusing on that much, so I need to be doing something more proactive. And a good example is right here. You are really not accomplishing much at all. You're kind of just sitting around the mid lane. Maybe soaking up some XP, but for the most part, that's not really beneficial for you or your team. And instead, you could be doing something else with your time. And had you ask yourself at this moment, what could I be doing? Or like what am I accomplishing right now? One thing that you could have been accomplishing is getting some vision on Baron. So I don't mean to say that the enemy team taking Baron is completely your fault, because everybody on your team has the capability to provide wards and vision. But it's something that we just pointed out that you could have easily been a part of. And who knows, maybe you do get vision and the enemy still gets Baron. But that's something that you should be working on, is making sure that you're paying attention, that you're focusing throughout the entirety of the game, and that you're getting things accomplished on the map rather than just sitting around mid lane. That's just one example. But you might notice that as you start to ask yourself this question more times in your games, you'll notice like, wow, I'm really being very inactive at a lot of moments in the game, and that's something I need to fix. Oh. Okay, so this is just another example of what I was just talking about. This is the second time that I've seen it happen in the past few minutes, so I would say that at this point, this is one of your biggest flaws as a player. So when it comes to flaws, everybody has a lot of flaws. There's nobody that's perfect at this game. Even Faker, the undisputed best player to ever play this game, is going to have a lot of flaws in his gameplay. But when it comes to flaws and mistakes, there's two different kinds of them. There's the very small mistakes, which are very easily fixable, and then there's the large looming mistakes that are going to take a lot of practice in order to fix. And I think, as I mentioned, considering that we've seen you make this same mistake twice in the past 3 minutes or so, that this is probably one of your biggest mistakes. So staying focused throughout the entirety of a game, making sure that you're getting things accomplished on the map, and that you're being productive, is one thing that you're really going to want to start to focus up on if you are looking to climb out of D5 this season. This is another thing. I mean, this is a very, very small thing, but this has been a huge factor throughout this entire game. Is you kind of tunnel vision in on poking. So tunnel vision can be a part of a lot of different things in League of Legends. And I don't think that tunnel visioning or like having tunnel vision as a whole is a problem of yours. Because you seem to have a pretty good sense of like what's going on in team fights and whatnot. But when it comes to poking the enemy team, you get really tunnel vision for one reason or another. So that is another thing that I really need you to focus up on in the future. And I think there's a prime example of it right here. And this is another thing that we saw throughout the lane phase. But you get this idea in your head that you want to try to chunk the enemy team. And it becomes so much of a thought that you basically do whatever it is that you have to do in order to do it. So a really good example here is like you see a low HP or semi-low HP target, and you get this idea that you want to chunk them. So you walk up and start to like auto and use abilities and stuff. But you're tunnel visioning so hard that you don't even notice the potential of them turning on you, which is why you take so much damage here. And you don't die or anything, nothing terrible, aside from you having to back here. But the reason that I mention this is because I noticed this a lot in the lane phase as well. So make sure that you are not tunnel visioning super hard and that you are picking wise windows to engage on the enemy team. Or not even so much engage, but just, give them a little bit poke. Yeah. I would say that the main reason you guys lost this game was lack of coordination. All of the deaths have been, a 3-on-2, 2-on-3, like all these little skirmishes, rather than team fighting, which kind of shows that you guys weren't really on the same page. And again, I think I mentioned this just briefly, but you can never play the game for all of your teammates. When you're playing a game with 9 other people, you can't control the entire game, but you can have somewhat of a factor on it if you're like shot calling and communicating with your team. And who knows, maybe something as simple as letting your team know that grouping and fighting 5v5 is what you guys needed to do this game. Maybe that goes a long ways, and maybe that's what you guys do, and that allows you guys to win this game. But who knows? But that is something that you could have an impact on. There hasn't been too much team fighting in this game as a whole. Like I've mentioned, there's been a lot of little skirmishes, 3-on-2, 2-on-3, stuff like that. And this is kind of the first team fight that we've seen. And I noticed that you have pretty bad positioning, considering you're like all the way over here. I can't really say that that's a major flaw of yours yet, because this is the only team fight that we've seen. So I don't know if this is going to be the same situation in like team fights to come. But that is something to also keep an eye out on, is positioning in team fights. Okay, yeah, so we could talk a little bit about tilt. When it comes to tilt, I am not, a master of tilt. I am a very emotional player, meaning that I care a lot about my rank and how I'm playing and stuff. So when I'm not playing well and when teammates aren't playing well, I can get upset from time to time, and I'm not afraid to admit that. Not to say that I'm like a toxic player or that I tilt very, very easily, but I do get tilted, as many people do, and that's pretty understandable. When it comes to avoiding tilt, there's a few recommendations that I could say. The first thing is to avoid getting tilted is just to think about the big picture of the game, meaning that this is a game after all. So even though, it might seem like it makes, it matters a lot in the moment, it doesn't mean a lot in the big picture. And you have to also keep in mind that, when you're mad about a player or a game, ask yourself the question, will will this game still matter 24 hours from now? And more times than not, it won't. You'll play a game, you'll get upset about it or whatever, and then down the road, you'll never even give that game another thought, and it won't matter. So that's just something important to ask yourself. Like, does this game really matter? And is it worth getting upset and tilted over? So that is one thing. So that is how you can avoid getting tilted, is just, thinking about things in the big picture. Once you are tilted, though, it can be a little bit different. A little bit harder to untilt. My remedy for untilting is I like to either take a break from the game, or at least just a few minutes away from the game. That could be something as simple as watching some Netflix or like a YouTube video. I know that personally, a good habit that I got into is before jumping into another game. A lot of people like to just instantly press play again at the end of their game. I would just stop and watch a 10-minute YouTube video or something before I got back into another game to let my mind kind of refresh and everything. So that is something that you can do to untilt. Take some time away from the game, maybe take a walk or something. I watched a streamer once say that every time he was tilted, he would just take a walk around the block. It's different for everybody. Personally, I like to watch YouTube videos, but like I said, it's different for everybody. And that would be my advice for untilting. But you can kind of avoid tilting by just looking at the big picture. All right, so this is a really good example of another one of my golden rules, and I'm glad that I finally get the chance to mention it. So one of my golden rules, or one of my many golden rules, is you never want to put yourself in a situation that has a higher chance of hurting you than helping you, and that is often the case when it comes to helping your teammates get out of bad situations. I would say that I have a pretty unpopular opinion. A lot of people have this idea that you should always try to help your teammates and try to get them out of any situation that that is possible. But on the other hand, I think that if you try to help a teammate that has a high chance of dying, what you're essentially doing is giving the team 2 kills instead of 1 kill. That's kind of the case here. The reason that you're so far up here is because you were potentially trying to save Fizz. And instead of just letting him die, instead what's going to happen is because you're so far up here, like I just mentioned, instead of it being a 1-0, it's going to be a 2-0. Then that 2-0 is going to turn into a Baron. That Baron's going to turn into this game ending. Whereas, if you let Fizz die, who knows? Maybe you guys are able to contest this Baron with a 4-on-5. Maybe you guys win a fight 4-on-5. You just really never know. So that is another one of my golden rules that you always want to keep in mind is don't put yourself in a bad situation or in a situation that has a higher chance of failing than it does succeeding, especially when it comes to saving your teammates, because that will just result in even more damage. So just basically you're going to keep the damage to a minimum. Okay, so you're about to die right here again. This isn't really much of a team fight. It's kind of all over the place. And it's not really like a 5v5, but it's somewhat close to a team fight. And once again, we're noticing you have really, really bad positioning. So I would say that at this point, I can kind of confirm that positioning is a large problem of yours. So that's another thing that I really suggest that you work on in your games to come. With that, though, the enemy team is going to look to end the game, and they probably will pick up a few more kills on their way. That'll be the end of the game, so now we'll look at your runes. Okay, so like I said, I don't like to go against what has already been proven to work. And considering Stunt got rank 1, who, I think I mentioned him already, but he's the person who I made the video about. He has proven that his runes with Janna worked because he got rank 1 with Janna being one of his most played champions. So with that being said, I would almost just copy his page entirely, which starts with the change right here from comment to Airy. I mentioned earlier how Airy is going to be better, and the fact that he's taking kind of just further proves that. Aside from that, though, everything else in the sorcery tree is going to be correct. A lot of people like to take Transcendence, another good rune, but Celerity just simply works better on Janna, so that's why that's going to complete that page. On the other hand, we're going to be taking Inspiration with Magical Footwear and Cosmic Insight. Cosmic Insight is just, a really, really good rune. CDR is always really nice. Regular CDR, max CDR, Summoner Spell CDR, and Item CDR is going to work a lot with Locking and Redemption. And on top of that, Boots is probably one of the strongest runes in the game right now. It was kind of Boots and Perfect Timing for the longest time being the strongest runes. But when it comes to Janna, I think that Magical Footwear will be the best option. And like I've already mentioned, this is what Stunt runs. This is how he plays his Janna, and he hit rank 1. So you really can't argue against this page, and I think that is just a really solid page to be running. But with that being said, that should conclude about everything.